Today's story isn't just drama, it's a powerful, real-time unraveling of ego, justice, and the quiet strength of integrity. In a world where arrogance often hides behind titles, what happens when the system finally pushes back? The arbitration chamber on the 47th floor of the Lexington Justice Tower didn't look like a place where careers ended, but today it felt like it. A sweeping view of downtown Chicago shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but no one was looking. Inside, under the sterile glow of recessed lights, rows of attorneys, aides, and observers sat in stiff silence. There were no flags, no judge's bench, just a sleek central table, glass-walled observation rooms, and screens projecting live transcripts on the walls. It was modern, efficient, and unnervingly transparent. Senator JD Vance sat near the front, his expression unreadable, hands folded over a slim binder. He wore a charcoal gray suit and a senator's stillness, the kind that didn't rattle under scrutiny. Around him, whispers rose and fell like a tide. This wasn't just another closed-door ethics proceeding. Word had gotten out. Too many high-profile rulings, too many insider deals traced back to one man. The man himself entered precisely on time. Arbitrator Malcolm Trask, flanked by two aides in dark suits, strode into the room like it was a stage he had personally commissioned. He didn't look at Vance. He didn't have to. Trask was the kind of official who didn't believe in oversight, at least not when it was aimed at him. Tall, silver-haired, with the posture of a man convinced of his own brilliance, he carried his reputation like a robe. Admired by loyalists, despised by watchdogs. As he took his seat at the head of the table, the room quieted to a heavy stillness. He flipped through a slim folio with theatrical nonchalance, then looked up, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Let's get this over with," he said, voice dry as paper. It wasn't just a dismissal of the process. It was a challenge. Across the table, Eleanor Shaw, the lead federal ethics counsel, didn't flinch. She clicked her pen, placed a document in front of her, and raised her eyes to meet his. The lines had been drawn, and as the door clicked shut behind them, sealing out the buzz of the world beyond the glass, it became clear to everyone in that room something irreversible was about to unfold. Arbitrator Malcolm Trask leaned back in his chair with the kind of casual entitlement that only years of unchecked power could breed. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored blazer, not out of necessity but as a slow, silent message. This room, this process, this entire proceeding belongs to me. Without looking up from the file, he let out a breathless chuckle and said, "Ethics hearings used to be about ethics, now they're just PR stunts with better lighting." A few uneasy glances flickered around the room. JD Vance didn't move, but his eyes narrowed slightly, taking in every word. Eleanor Shaw didn't respond. She simply placed a single sheet of paper before her, a transcript of the senator's upcoming statement. Trask finally lifted his gaze, not to engage but to survey, like a monarch reviewing a room of underlings. "Senator Vance," he said, drawing out the title like it was a joke he'd already heard too many times, "I assume you'll be taking the long route to make your point?" The silence that followed was cold and deliberate. Vance calmly adjusted the microphone and opened his folder, but before he could begin, Trask interrupted again. "Just try to keep it under an hour. Some of us have better things to do than listen to political theater." A soft stir ran through the chamber. Even some of Trask's aides looked up, unsure if the line had landed or gone too far. JD Vance kept his voice steady. "I'm here under subpoena, Arbitrator. My remarks are brief, but they are essential to the matter of judicial influence being investigated today." Trask snorted. "That's adorable. A sitting senator lecturing me on judicial conduct." His tone was slick with derision, but his eyes gleamed with something darker, contempt, maybe even fear, buried beneath the swagger. He turned toward Eleanor next. "And you, Ms. Shaw, how many political careers do you think you'll launch after this one?" Eleanor blinked once. "I'm here for accountability, not ambition." Trask smirked, leaned forward and tapped his pen against the desk. "Of course you are." The sound echoed through the chamber like a gavel made of ice. He looked around at the spectators, seemingly emboldened by the cameras watching through the glass. "Let the record reflect that this proceeding has already veered into self-righteous posturing. It was clear what Trask wanted: dominance through disruption. He wasn't just dismissing the process, he was daring someone to challenge him, to throw the first real punch. But no one took the bait. Not yet. Vance sat still. Shaw remained composed. Only the low hum of tension filled the room now, vibrating beneath the polished surface. What Trask didn't know, or refused to see, was that the room was no longer laughing with him. It was watching him unravel. JD Vance opened his folder, slow and deliberate, as if the weight of what he was about to say deserved its own rhythm. The room was still, every eye on him. Some curious, some skeptical, others just waiting to see if he'd flinch under Trask's spotlight. But Vance wasn't a man easily rattled. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and began in a calm, even tone. In the last 6 months, multiple cases have surfaced that suggest a pattern, not of legal misjudgment, but of personal interference originating from this chamber. His voice was steady, composed. He didn't look at Trask directly, but his words carved toward the arbitrator like water wearing down stone. Trask rolled his eyes audibly, let out a sigh so theatrical it bordered on cartoonish. "Let me guess," he muttered, "you're here to save the Republic." Vance didn't bite. He continued, citing case names, dates, and decisions, all pointing to rulings where Trask's involvement aligned suspiciously with private business interests and known associates. The documents had already been submitted. The trail was on record. "This isn't about partisanship," Vance said. "It's about precedent. When rulings consistently benefit the same circles of influence, the credibility of our system is compromised." Across the table, Marcus Delaney, Vance's lead counsel, watched the arbitrator with the quiet focus of a chess player, waiting for the other side to blink. Next to him, Noah Kim was already typing on a secure tablet, coordinating with a federal liaison to prepare a real-time misconduct motion should Trask push the hearing past protocol. Trask leaned forward, arms folded, lips curled into a sneer. "You speak like a man who thinks he's got the moral high ground," he said, "but all I hear is someone angling for headlines." "If the facts get printed," Vance replied calmly, "that's journalism. If they get buried, that's corruption." A few people in the gallery shifted at that. The jab hadn't come from anger, it came from clarity. That made it land harder. Trask blinked, a rare beat of silence falling between them. Then he snapped, "You think quoting platitudes makes you a constitutional authority?" Vance said. "But what discredits authority is refusing to answer for its own behavior." It was clear now Vance wasn't here to spar. He was here to endure, to hold his ground, to let Trask reveal himself one jab at a time. With every interruption, every sarcastic aside, Trask chipped away at his own facade. The room felt it. So did the press seated behind the glass, already scribbling furiously. Vance turned a page in his notes, unfazed. The hearing was still in session, but the balance of power had already started to shift. For the first time since taking his seat, Malcolm Trask didn't have a line ready. The chamber, once filled with the echoes of his smug interruptions, had gone still. Not because the room feared him, but because it no longer respected him. JD Vance's testimony wasn't fiery or theatrical. It was methodical, clinical, and that made it dangerous. Every fact, every citation chipped away at the illusion Trask had built around himself. Across the table, Eleanor Shaw placed another document in front of her, this one marked with a red tab. She didn't speak, just let the paper sit there like a loaded question. Trask glanced at it, then back at Vance. His smirk had thinned. "We done with the dramatics yet?" he asked, voice lower now, the edge creeping in. "We haven't even begun," Shaw replied. Then she calmly turned the page and slid a copy of a deposition across the table, signed by a former clerk who had testified to Trask's behind-the-scenes influence over a private arbitration outcome. The timing aligned with a real estate development owned by one of Trask's former law partners. Trask didn't respond immediately. He tapped his pen once, twice, 3 times, then shoved the paper back toward her. "Hearsay," he said dismissively. But the words didn't carry the same bite they had 30 minutes earlier. The people in the gallery weren't chuckling anymore. Even the stenographer, whose hands had moved with mechanical precision all morning, hesitated slightly as she looked up from her keyboard. At the table, Marcus Delaney leaned toward Noah Kim. "That's enough," he whispered. "File it." Noah gave a small nod and began typing. Trask tried to speak again, something about career politicians with God complexes, but it fell flat. The room had turned, not loudly, not all at once, but undeniably. Where there had been tension before, now there was something worse for Trask. Detachment. The power he wielded so carelessly had started to slip from his hands, and in its place came the one thing he never expected to face in his own chamber: accountability. And he didn't even know it yet. The moment arrived not with shouting, but with the quiet ping of a notification. A soft chime from a tablet, followed by another from across the chamber, then another. It wasn't disruptive, but it was unmistakable. Trask paused mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing as the sound scattered through the room like falling rain. "Something funny?" he asked, scanning the faces around him, his voice clipped. No one answered. Across the table, Noah Kim had just submitted the official misconduct motion to the Office of the Inspector General. It was signed, time-stamped, and already circulating to key observers. Marcus Delaney didn't look up from his screen. Eleanor Shaw sat very still, her expression unreadable. JD Vance leaned back slightly, hands still folded, watching it unfold without a word. The gallery had gone perfectly silent. A silence that wasn't passive but loaded, charged with the awareness that something had just shifted. Trask looked from one side of the room to the other. "What's going on?" he asked again, this time more forcefully. His voice echoed against the glass walls, too loud in a space that now belonged to someone else. Vance said nothing. He didn't need to. The story had moved on from Trask's performance. Across the room, a court officer stepped outside the door for a moment and returned almost instantly, whispering something into a colleague's ear. Then they both looked toward the rear entrance of the chamber. Trask followed their gaze, confused, still clinging to the illusion that he was in control. He opened his mouth to speak again, but stopped when the doors at the back of the room creaked open with the kind of slow, deliberate weight that made people instinctively hold their breath. Two men entered, neither wearing judicial robes nor legal badges, just suits, black, plain, with the steel stillness of men who didn't need to announce why they were here. And just like that, the performance ended. The two federal marshals moved with the kind of calm authority that didn't demand silence, it created it. Every head in the chamber turned, conversations died mid-whisper, phones lowered without anyone needing to be told. Arbitrator Malcolm Trask sat frozen for a beat, his eyes flicking between the approaching men and the rows of stunned faces around him. His confidence faltered, but only for a moment. "This is a closed ethics session," he said, voice sharp, rehearsed. "You're interrupting proceedings under federal jurisdiction." The taller marshal, a man with a buzz cut and the unshakable calm of someone who had done this before, stepped forward and withdrew a folded document from his jacket. "Malcolm Trask," he said, his voice carrying without effort, "you are currently under investigation by the Office of the Inspector General for judicial misconduct, obstruction of justice, and abuse of authority." He extended the warrant. "We have a lawful order for your immediate detention." The paper in the marshal's hand may as well have been a sledgehammer. Trask didn't reach for it. He blinked once, then gave a short, incredulous laugh. "This is absurd," he snapped. "This hearing isn't over. You're not authorized to remove me in the middle of a federal inquiry." "This hearing is no longer in your control," the marshal replied, voice even. "You are not above the law." The silence that followed was crushing. Trask turned toward the court officers seated nearby, men and women who had worked under his gavel for years. "Get these men out of here," he barked. But no one moved, not the bailiff, not the clerks, not the security posted by the doors. Some wouldn't even meet his eyes. He was alone. JD Vance watched silently, his expression neutral. He hadn't moved since the marshals entered. He didn't need to. Trask was collapsing on his own. "This is political," Trask hissed, rising now, his hands white-knuckled on the edge of the desk. "A witch hunt orchestrated by bitter bureaucrats. I've ruled in hundreds of cases, hell, thousands. Do you think this is how justice works?" He looked around the room, waiting for someone to agree. No one did. "Turn around," the second marshal said, pulling handcuffs from his belt. Trask stared at them like they were foreign objects. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, voice cracking. "This is my chamber. I'm in charge here." But he wasn't, and everyone knew it. Slowly, the marshal stepped closer. "Sir, I will not ask again." Trask looked out at the glass gallery wall, at the journalists, the cameras, the people watching from behind the scenes. For a man who had lived his career in performance, this was his final act, and he didn't know his lines. He straightened, jaw clenched, then turned around with visible reluctance. The cuffs clicked into place behind his back with a cold finality. The sound echoed louder than any gavel he'd ever slammed. As he was led away, his eyes met JD Vance's one last time. There was no hatred there, just the dull, stunned recognition of someone realizing too late that the game was over. Behind him, something slid off the desk, Trask's nameplate. It landed on the floor with a metallic clatter, spinning once before coming to rest. The rain was over. The silence was absolute. For a long moment after Trask was escorted out, no one in the chamber moved. It was as if the room itself had stopped breathing, stunned by the sudden absence of the man who had dominated it so completely just minutes earlier. Then, slowly the silence gave way to a collective exhale. Soft rustles of paper, shifting chairs, the distant click of a pen being set down. The court clerk sat motionless, as if still waiting for a command that would never come. Reporters along the back row were already typing furiously, some speaking in hushed tones into recorders, trying to distill the shock into headlines. One of them, a woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a lanyard labeled Press Pool 1, muttered, "We just witnessed a sitting arbitrator taken out in cuffs. That's not a story. That's a tectonic shift." At the table, Eleanor Shaw finally relaxed her posture, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just gathered her papers with calm precision, the way a surgeon might after a long and tense procedure. Across from her, Marcus Delaney exchanged a glance with Noah Kim, who gave a barely perceptible nod. The motion they had filed had triggered a fall no one could have predicted would come so swiftly. JD Vance remained seated, quietly placing his notes back into his folder. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His composure had been a weapon more effective than any outburst. As people began to rise, the room still seemed hesitant, as though unsure of what came next in the absence of its would-be ruler. The chamber had always belonged to Trask, until now. His exit had left a vacuum, not of leadership but of arrogance, and into that vacuum poured something rare. Quiet clarity. The reckoning had arrived, and for the first time in a long time, justice hadn't whispered, it had roared. JD Vance stood slowly, smoothing the front of his suit with deliberate calm. The murmurs had begun to rise again, reporters whispering, staffers collecting files, legal teams conferring in hushed tones, but around him a small sphere of stillness remained. He nodded once to Marcus Delaney, then to Eleanor Shaw, who returned the gesture without words. There was no celebration, no vindication, just the quiet understanding that something historic had just occurred. As he walked down the aisle toward the chamber doors, people instinctively stepped aside. A few heads turned, a few eyes lingered, but no one stopped him. Outside the gallery, a reporter moved quickly to intercept him. "Senator Vance," she called, slightly breathless. He paused, turning just enough to acknowledge her. "Did you know this was going to happen?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge and a confession at once. For a beat, Vance said nothing. Then he looked down at his watch, adjusted the strap, and said with the faintest trace of a wry smile, "Let's just say, justice has a way of showing up." He didn't wait for a follow-up. He simply turned and continued down the hall, the echo of his footsteps fading behind him as the chaos of what had just transpired bloomed into headlines and breaking news. The chamber door closed slowly, and the last image of him was not that of a politician seeking credit, but of a man who had shown up, told the truth, and let the system speak for itself. Power, when worn too long, begins to feel permanent. That was Malcolm Trask's mistake. He believed the chair he sat in made him untouchable. That authority came from volume, from dominance, from knowing no one would dare say enough. But power isn't in the gavel or the title, it's in the trust placed behind them, and the moment that trust is broken, the fall isn't theatrical, it's quiet, sudden, absolute. What happened in that chamber wasn't just a reckoning for one man. It was a reminder for everyone watching, inside and outside the room, that accountability still has a voice. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it enters the room without a word, in the form of a motion, a folded warrant, a pair of cuffs. JD Vance never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He understood that power used wisely doesn't demand attention, it invites it. In an era where headlines scream and outrage sells, restraint felt like revolution. His silence held more weight than any argument, and in contrast, Trask's downfall was not just personal, it was symbolic. A man so convinced of his invincibility, reduced to silence not by force, but by truth laid bare. The final echo of the gavel wasn't struck. It was dropped, unceremoniously, like a mask no longer needed. In the end, there were no victory speeches, no grand pronouncements, just the fading footsteps of a senator walking away from the wreckage of another man's unchecked ego. And maybe that's what justice really looks like. Not fireworks, but a room finally cleared of noise, a space where truth stands on its own. Because real power isn't about control, it's about accountability. And when that comes knocking, no title, no robe, and no arrogance can hold the door shut. The story of Arbitrator Malcolm Trask's fall serves as a powerful reminder that unchecked authority is never immune from accountability. For too long, Trask wielded power like a weapon, mocking, silencing, and controlling those beneath his bench, convinced that his position placed him above consequence. But titles don't shield character, and arrogance eventually exposes itself. The most profound lesson is this: real power is earned through integrity, not intimidation. Senator JD Vance's calm, unwavering presence throughout the hearing proved that strength doesn't always come from speaking louder. It often comes from choosing when to speak, and when to let the truth speak for itself. In a world obsessed with image, performance, and dominance, the story challenges us to reconsider what justice actually looks like. It's not about spectacle, it's about courage, restraint, and the quiet force of doing what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. No matter how high someone rises, the system, when it functions, can still hold them accountable. And sometimes, the most powerful blow isn't the one delivered in anger, but the one delivered in silence, with evidence, and with unwavering resolve. Justice may be delayed, but when it arrives, it doesn't just punish. It restores faith that the truth still matters.